So today we're going to talk about what happens when hierarchy hurts. Those moments in Korean family life where 서열 문화, which is the hierarchical system, and hyo, which is parental fealty, feel much heavier than love. We're going to dive into some Korean drama with some true stories sent in by daughter-in-laws who chose boundaries over silence. And yes, a little delicious petty revenge. One of them was slow cooking for 8 years. Before the revenge happened, one was served fresh and polite, and one of the revenges was covered by karma itself. Hello friends and family, this is Megan Moon, aka 처음 미국 사람. So today we're going to go over some real life Korean dramas. I hope you got your snacks ready or your tea ready or whatever you want. If you are someone who's ever been told to endure for the sake of family, then this is your sign to listen in. Let's get into the first story. The first story was sent in by, I call everyone Mrs. Kim. Mrs. Kim says, I grew up with just my father. My mother passed away early and my dad raised me alone. He was my only family that I had left on my side. My in-laws always treated me with this quiet and sort of condescending air. They always took small jabs at me that began to add up. But then one day, my father, the only parent I had, the only person I had in my family, died suddenly. I was shattered. It was a 2-day funeral in the countryside held at a small funeral hall with a memorial room set up for him. If you guys have been to a Korean funeral, then you know how it goes. There's a portrait of the deceased in the front of a room. It has white chrysanthemums around it. There's a burning stick of incense sending up thin smoke, and there's a condolence ledger near the entrance. So guests, before walking into the funeral room, they sign the guest ledger, they give an envelope with the condolence money in it, and they usually come in and bow. There's 2 bows, like full on all the way to the floor, bows to the portrait, and then they offer brief words to the bereaved. And then they are guided into the dining area for a simple meal, and there's typically makgeolli or soju or beer. Always got to have alcohol in these Korean events. So people typically cycle in and out all day and through much of the night, and the family would typically stay near the portrait so they can receive each visitor that comes. And Korean funerals are 24 hours. So like once it starts, it's 2 or 3 days of just the family stays there all day and all night. And that's typically because people come from all over Korea, and Koreans have very crazy work schedules, so sometimes you go after work. So it is very difficult for the family to have to do that also. Lack of sleep, funeral preparations. But back to what Mrs. Kim says. She says, I had no siblings to share the burden, so I had to organize everything together with my husband, fielding calls, greeting the guests, making sure everyone signed the ledger, deciding on the flower stands. But while I was overwhelmed with grief and running on no sleep, she says that her eyes were, pretty puffy and red and pretty raw. But as the hall lights hummed and footsteps came and went, the air was thick with incense and whispers, my mother-in-law stepped up, looked me over, lingering on my eyes, and she said, did you get some work done on your face? 네 얼굴에 손 댔니? Were your eyes always like that? Okay, I'm sorry, we are at a freaking funeral and you're gonna come up to me and ask me if I had surgery on my face because my eyes are probably puffy from crying? What the hell? Is that literally the first thing she said to you? That's horrible. Anyway, Mrs. Kim says, in that moment, I wanted to slap someone, but instead I swallowed it and moved past it. She said the in-laws were just really irking her nerves, and some of them were even complaining as they walked in about how far the drive is. Like, oh, I drove so far to get here. Going into the funeral, they were grumbling about driving to the funeral. She said they gave subtle little boast and self-praise about how they came, as if attendance were a favor that they'd done for me. Then soon after that, my mother-in-law sighed. It was a pretty loud sigh. My mother-in-law then said, if only you had a sibling. There's no one from your side to help. So my son has to help and suffer along with you. Wow. What a shame. My poor son having to stick by his wife's side when her only family has passed away. What a rude thing to think about. So in the dining room, guests who had just bowed to my father's portrait were settling into long tables with the stainless steel chopsticks. There was soup steaming and rising out of bowls. You could hear the bottles of soju thudding softly and clinking as they were set down. But over that clink and murmur, my in-laws got super animated about something. So I looked up and they were happily talking and debating about dresses that my sister-in-law's daughter were going to wear to her piano competition next week. She's still young, so this one's better, right? 애가 아직 어리니까 이쪽이 낫지? No. This dress is much prettier. 아니야, 난 이것도 예쁜데. So then they stared at me and said, "Hey, Mrs. Kim, which one do you like? Which dress do you want for her to wear to her piano recital?" So Mrs. Kim says, I stared at the table for a long ass time. She didn't say ass time, but I threw that in there because this is one of those, what the hell? This is a funeral of her father. So Mrs. Kim says, my father just died and you want to talk to me about my niece's dresses right now? This is really too much. 다들 너무 하시네. But my mother-in-law shot back very matter-of-factly. Well, we all don't get to meet up often, so since we're all together, we might as well discuss the dresses for the piano recital. Then she said a phrase that would brand herself into my bones. What's the big deal? Don't be so dramatic. The living have to live. 산 사람은 살아야지. How long are you going to cry about his death? It's not like the dead will come back. How can you be so heartless? This is literally the funeral day. Like the day of the funeral. That means that he only died like probably the previous day, like 1 or 2 days ago. And she's not supposed to be crying just a couple days after her dad passed away. And you're going to come and treat her so heartlessly? So anyway, Mrs. Kim's sister-in-law tried to smooth it over. She said, "Olke mian. I'm sorry, my sister-in-law. You know, our mom, she's just so cool about everything." So in Korea, they use this word like cool해. They're cool, but it's not like how we use cool. Like, oh, that person's so cool. Like they have a good fashion style or they're this. Like in Korea, a lot of the times people use the word cool to just mean they're chill with everything. Like nothing really upsets them, right? The sister-in-law was like, you know, our mom, she's just cool about everything. Like nothing phases her. You know, that's why she acts like this. Just please understand her and don't let it get to you, basically. I don't care how cool someone is. Being cool and even-tempered, I guess, is another way you could say it is, doesn't justify not having sympathy for people when they've lost people, right? Like, yes, it's not your loss, but you can still have sympathy for other people having a loss. But then right after that moment, my husband and his siblings were like, okay, anyway, but can you pick a dress? Which dress do you think is better? In that day, in that room, Mrs. Kim said, all of these people became dead to me. Like they were no longer human in my eyes because what the hell? How can you treat someone like that? And the recital was scheduled for just a few days later. So as, you know, she's still dealing and gathering with funeral things, everyone went to the piano recital as scheduled, including her husband. Her husband was pestering her to come along, but she thinks it's probably just so that he could hand off, you know, childcare to her and enjoy the recital for himself. So Mrs. Kim said, I refused. I was flaming hot because I was still dealing with and getting all this funeral stuff arranged. But my husband grumbled and just went to the piano recital alone. So she spent that day holding her father's photo and getting everything done. And she said that she cried until her chest hurt. That night, her husband came back from the recital. His cheeks were flushed with laughter. And he took one look at his wife and he said, "Stop acting so pathetic." Right? Like, how long are you going to whine about your father dying? Mind you, it still hasn't even been a week since the man has gone. And she's still getting everything in order after the death, right? So Mrs. Kim says, that's when something in me hardened and it clicked. From then on, I lived with one single resolution. I would return what I endured, and then I would divorce. Mrs. Kim said, I'm gonna get revenge on these people. That's insane, though. If it were me, honestly, if my husband did not care that someone in my family died and I was hurting from it, and they just sort of ignored it, pushed it off, and said, get over it, they would be dead to me. Like, we would be getting a divorce the next day. I would let him know. I would say, look, if you don't know how to empathize with people, and you're trying to tell me to just get over the death of my parent, that's the end of us. If something as big as death doesn't warrant any sort of sympathy from your partner, you know, in the daily things that they do, he probably doesn't care, like, about her feelings at all or to comfort her in any sort of way. Like, that's not a very safe person to be attached to. You know what I mean? I feel like you can't really have a good, trusting relationship if you can't even grieve to them and get a hug, a pat on the back. You know, I'm so sorry your father passed. You must be so sad. Like, none of that. Just telling her to get over it and come to a piano recital. This is insane. 8 years passed by. 8 years crawled by, and then my father-in-law died. This is crazy. You stayed with a man that you know that you wanted to be divorced with just so that you could wait to get revenge. For 8 years, if one of the in-laws was sick and you wanted to get revenge and you knew they was going to pass soon, maybe wait a couple months, but 8 years just to get revenge on them, girl, I think that's a bit much. Even though what they did was insane and just beyond comprehension crazy. Also, I think understanding the pain of death, like I would never want to rub someone else's death or loss in their face either. Like I just couldn't do that. But anyway, Mrs. Kim is petty and she said, I'm getting my revenge. At the funeral, their wailing filled the memorial room with the picture of the father-in-law was up in. The volume alone was like, hearing them wail was just music to my ears. But then one of the family members, my sister-in-law, hissed at me, how can you be so cold? You don't seem to be sad at all. So I looked straight at my mother-in-law and said, cool as glass. Mother, you said the living have to live. 산 사람 살아야 한다고 하셨잖아요. Father-in-law must have gone to a better place, right? So then a relative snapped at me. What the heck? How can you say that to her? But Mrs. Kim says, I didn't even blink. What do you mean? You said mother's cool. So she shouldn't be fazed by something like that. Why would she be upset or something like that if she's so cool? And then Mrs. Kim said, I added in, oh, by the way, I'm just going to go to Jeju-do in a couple days with my friends. You know, you said when there are many siblings, they can handle everything amongst themselves. So you don't need me to handle anything for you, right? I'm just going to go to Jeju-do. Mrs. Kim said the anger bubbled up and spilled out of her like she was possessed, and everything that they had said to her, she just threw back at them. And she said they just swallowed it because they had to taste their own words and they know that they said that to her. So she actually went to Jeju-do, like in the next couple of days while they're still handling all their funeral stuff. She said the sea wind was loud and clean and calm. It was awesome, but my phone was non-stop being lit up by my husband and family members. And one of my friends glanced at my phone and was like, hey, you don't want to pick that up? And then Miss Kim was like, no, ma'am, it's my husband, so leave it. I endured 8 years with these people just for this day so I could rub it back in their face. Mrs. Kim says her friend shook her head, half amazed, but also half disappointed. You are something else, girl. So after I came home from Jeju-do, as expected, my husband treated me as if I was crazy. He barked, how could you do that to my mom? She's so upset, she just collapsed. So Mrs. Kim said I looked into his eyes and I said, well, good. Now you know how I felt 8 years ago. And how about you stop this pathetic mourning? And then she said the next day she went and filed for divorce. And that was the end of their marriage. She said, to people who thought that only their feelings mattered, I left the final message behind. The weight of death is the same for everyone. I didn't shout it, I showed it by returning their own words to them and then walking away. Okay, well, first of all, to wait 8 years for someone to die so that you can go and rub it in their face is another level of diabolical. Like, you gotta be some kind of crazy. Because how could you stay with someone that long and just like in their face pretend like everything is okay, right? To wait for revenge for that long, girl. You are really something else. And while I don't condone kicking people when they're down, like when somebody that is near and dear to them dies, they did it to you, so they do kind of deserve it. But at the same time, how do you have the patience to wait so long? Why did you wait so long? Just leave. But this is one thing that I also wanted to discuss, was that oftentimes in Korea in the previous generation, they sort of have this belief that the husband's family is greater than or higher in the family hierarchy than the wife's family. So there are some in-laws still, like to this day in the previous generation, who believe that and who sort of treat things that happen in the wife's family as if they're no big deal, because who cares? We're your family now, right? Not them. Some of them have this attitude where it's just like, so what? We don't really care about you, but they expect you to care about them. It's very one-sided. And they sort of think it makes them gods. Like, I am your mom-in-law, so I'm a god to you. Whatever I do to you, you need to accept, but you don't dare do anything back to me. And in a lot of cases, the parents of both the bride and the groom fall into line in that way. Like, I know someone who's Korean American. They were born in America, but their mom and parents were both born and raised in Korea. Then they moved to America for a while, and then when she was an adult, they all moved back to Korea. So she met a Korean man here, and then the time came for both the families to meet for the 상경대. So she said when her mom sat down and met the in-laws, she suddenly just got in a place of like subservience. Like everything they said was like, yeah, we're like lower than them, and whatever they said, she just like went along with. And she was like, Mom, ew, what are you doing? So then they went to the bathroom, and the mom was like, those are your in-laws. Like, they're above us. We have to treat them like in this way. Whatever they say goes. Otherwise, you might not be able to get married. So there are still people who sort of really heavily believe that. Like, Korea's moving away from that now, but there are still some cases where they think husband's family is above wife's family, and in some cases will treat them like crap. Anyway, Mrs. Kim, you're a savage. You're crazy. But I am glad that you got out of that situation. I don't know. What do you guys think? That was a bit dramatic for me. This next story also has to deal with in-laws thinking that they're above daughter-in-laws. This story was sent in by, we're gonna switch it up and say, Mrs. Lee. Mrs. Lee says, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law used to insist that they weren't the type to make a daughter-in-law suffer. For a while, I believed it. Then my husband left for a 12-month overseas work assignment. So I was left all alone. At first, my mother-in-law sounded very warm and like she cared about me and was trying to fill the gap that my husband had left. She would say things like, aren't you lonely living alone? We're close. You should drop by sometimes. I'll make something tasty this weekend. You should come and eat. Mrs. Lee said it felt like comfort. I was nervous going without my husband, but also relieved to be invited and to not have to eat alone again. In Korea, you know, I've talked about it before, a lot of people don't want to eat alone. Like, even to the point where, like, if it's late at night and they want to have a snack, and like, let's say you have a partner or a husband or a wife, like I do, if it's late at night and they want to eat a snack, they'll ask you, hey, are you hungry? If you say no, even if they want to eat a snack, like they might not even go get the snack just because they don't want to be the only one eating it. So they want you to like eat along with them. Like a lot of people just don't want to eat alone. So when Mrs. Lee got the invitation, she felt really loved and appreciated. So the very first time she opened their apartment door, there was the smell of freshly steamed rice and sesame oil. You could hear the soft thunk of wooden spoons against the metal pots. The TV was on, so you could hear a variety of shows coming from the TV. But my sister-in-law was already sat at the table and she was wiping her hands as if she'd finished. She said, welcome, 언니, 어서 와요. We were hungry, so we actually ate first. So just you are going to eat now, but we'll sit with you. So Mrs. Lee said a plate was set for me. I sat by myself, you know, while they sort of watched me eat. Mrs. Lee said the food smelled great, but the first bite I ate, it was a little bit sour in a way that it shouldn't be. There was like a faint fizz at the back of my tongue and my stomach sort of tightened a little bit. So I said, 어머니, mother, this tastes a bit spoiled. You know, it's hot outside lately. Food goes bad easily. You know, we should be careful. So this is a note that you should know. This is something that drives me crazy. I had to tell my husband, don't do this. But a lot of Korean people, when they make food, they don't put it in the refrigerator right away. They just leave it out. So like you'll go to some people's house and there's like soup that they just made and it's just been sitting out all day and then they just reboil it, I guess, which kills some of the bacteria, but I cannot with that old soup that's sitting out. One time I went to someone's house and then they had soup that was sitting on the thing. They're like, oh, you're hungry? Let me heat up some food for you. And then they heated it up. It was about 7 o'clock. And so I just asked, oh, when did you make that soup? They're like, oh, I made it this morning. So that food's been sitting out from 9 in the morning and it is 7 p.m. now. Absolutely not. No. I was like, no, I'm not hungry. And because I was like, I'm not eating that old soup been sitting out all day. I cannot do that. If food is finished eating, it needs to go right in the refrigerator, or it could stay out for maybe an hour or so to like stay warm for people to come, but not hours and hours. But especially the older people do this. So a lot of the times in the summer, like one time my husband, it was like last year, he made some soup and left it out. Literally only like 4 hours passed. And then he was like, this smells weird, but the soup had meat in it. I was like, you can't do that, guys. Stop leaving your food out, old Korean people. Put it in the refrigerator. But anyway, back to Mrs. Lee. Mrs. Lee said, my mother-in-law waved it off. Like, what are you talking about? We just ate this food too. And then my sister-in-law chimed in smiling. Yeah, 언니, as if we'd give you spoiled food. Anyway, we ate it and we're totally fine, so don't worry about it. Mrs. Lee said, I felt watched and silly for complaining, and out of politeness and the need to not make trouble with my in-laws while my husband was away, I forced myself to finish the food. But that evening when I got home, the nausea rose up like a tsunami. It came in waves. I had cold sweat on my neck, cramps twisting low in my belly, saliva pooling in my mouth before the rush to the bathroom. My hands shook. I sipped on water, but even the water came back up. So by night, I had admitted myself to a hospital. I was dehydrated and exhausted, had to get an IV. The doctor said that I had experienced some food poisoning. So the next day I checked in with my in-laws and I said, hey, 어머니, mom, were you okay after yesterday? I had stomach pain and I had to go to the hospital. I think something was wrong with the food. The mother-in-law's reply was cold. She said, well, we all ate it and we're fine. Nothing happened. Why are you the only one making a fuss? And anyway, you won't die from a little bad food, so stop worrying about it. But Mrs. Lee said something felt off. So after that, she started declining invitations to go over to their house, making polite excuses. But then my mother-in-law's birthday came and I could not refuse because in Korea, every elder birthday, you have to attend, even me. Sometimes they want to have their birthday at your house and they want you to make food for them. It can be a lot sometimes. But anyway, you don't decline the elders' birthday dinners. So Mrs. Lee reluctantly goes over. It's the normal cake, photos, the familiar perfume of incense from a nearby shelf. And as I got up to leave, She began filling a shopping bag, moving between the fridge and the pantry. Oh, you're leaving now, right? Since you're going, why don't you take these food? You know, I live alone and I have so much food left over. I can't eat it all. How about you take it? Mrs. Lee said she tried to deny it and was like, you know, I live alone too. I don't need anything. You know, my husband's not here. I don't need any food. But mother-in-law did not budge. When an elder gives you something, you just say thank you and you accept it. Girl, if you are married in Korea, you know every time you go to your in-laws' house, you come home with bags because they be trying to give you stuff left and right. At first, to be nice, I would take it, but then after a while, I'd be like, I'm not taking this bag no more. So then my husband started like really speaking up, like very loudly, like, we don't want it. They'd be trying to give you way too much, like Korean elders. Their idea of relationship is not talking and caring about those emotional things. It's just taking care of you by giving you stuff, whether you want it or not. And it's rude for you to not take it. Anywho, so Mrs. Lee was like, whatever. I came home, the bag clinked, the bottles are knocking in their plastic rings. I unpacked it onto the counter, but the yogurt and drinks were well past their expiration date. Some of the labels were even yellowing and like curled. The fruits and vegetables had gone soft and watery. The lettuce leaves were limp and sort of sticking onto the plastic bag. And there was a sour and sweetish smell coming from the bottom of the bag. Not Swedish, like my beautiful friend Sophia, but sweet-ish. You know that smell of like old fruits and vegetables that are sort of starting to ferment and like smell acidic and smell like alcohol? Right, it was a little bit of that smell coming from the bag. So Mrs. Lee said, my chest tightened with something that wasn't just disgust, it was a feeling of being used, right? Because they just gave her a bunch of old, clearly spoiled food. So Mrs. Lee called her mother-in-law and said, 어머님, I unpacked everything, but most of the stuff is past the expiration date. They're like really old. But my mother-in-law had an answer for everything. She said, 괜찮아. It's okay. If it's unopened, it's okay if it's past the expiration date. And plus, fruit tastes better the riper it is, right? And with the vegetables, you can just cut off the rotten parts. It's fine. But Mrs. Lee said that's when it clicked. They weren't caring for me. They were just offloading what they didn't want to eat. So I decided not to argue. I decided that I would get revenge. Like, this is not something that's just like getting on someone's nerves or making someone feel bad. This is like something that's dangerous. Like, those heifers gave her old expired food at the house, and you know they didn't eat it themselves that first day. They just took all their old foods and made some meal and then gave it to her. Like, what a shitty thing to do. Like, a lot of people don't realize this, but there are cases where people die from food poisoning depending on the type of bacteria in there. You could die. Like, they are messing with your health by giving you old expired food and expecting you to eat it. The fact that they just downplay that she went to the hospital, like, what are they doing? What is their problem? Again, it's like one of those situations where they feel like they're above you somehow, so they're just gonna haze you or mess with you in some way. Mrs. Lee said she was gonna get her petty revenge, but unlike Mrs. Kim, she said, I ain't waiting 8 years. I'm getting it right now. So Mrs. Lee calls her mom-in-law with her warmest voice, which she was trying to steady under the tremor of anger. She says, 어머님, my family sent lots of homegrown fresh ingredients from the countryside. I'd love to cook for you. Would you and sister come over tomorrow? They said, of course. So they came the next day. Mrs. Lee said she dressed the table. It was bright and abundant. There was salad glistening. There was fried rice steaming. There were smoothies beating with condensation on the table. She kept the mood breezy and light and smiled. And when they came in, she said, 많이 드세요. Please eat a lot. I actually was eating little by little as I was cooking, so I'm already full. So just you guys are going to be eating. Mrs. Lee said they ate as if it was their last meal and there were inmates on death row. And they were complimenting her left and right between mouthfuls of food. Who knew you cooked this well? Good, fresh ingredients really do make a difference. Mrs. Lee said she kept her tone light. Oh, this is actually made from the ingredients that you gave me yesterday. It's good, right? I used the yogurt in the salad dressing, the expired yogurt. I used the vegetables in the fried rice, since you can't really tell that they're old if they're in fried rice. And I blended the fruit into smoothies. They all turned out so delicious, right? So then at that moment, their forks paused in thin air. And my sister-in-law was like blinking like this with a fork or chopsticks. What? You made this with the food that you took from our place? I thought you said you had farm fresh food from your family. So Mrs. Lee said she pointed to a crate by the wall and said, yeah, the farm goods are unopened. That's over there. Then my sister-in-law's face hardened. You're so unbelievable. You should have told us from the start. So Mrs. Lee said, I kept my voice even. You know, the way you do when you finally see the whole picture of something. Why would I need to tell you that? It's not like I gave you anything that was unedible, right? Mrs. Lee said, then I returned their own logic gently to them, like placing a mirror in front of them on the table. But sister-in-law said, well, mom's older, so, you know, she could really get sick from eating this old food. Mom-in-law said, wow, look at you. How could you be so shameless deceiving us like this? So Mrs. Lee said, I turned to my mother-in-law and was like, what do you mean? You said that the food is fine, even if it's past the expiration date, right? The yogurt and stuff that I use, you said it's okay because it was unopened. And you said fruit tastes better the longer it ripes and the longer it sits. So that's why I made the smoothies. Sarma, don't tell me you gave me the food because you thought it was inedible and you didn't want to eat it yourselves. Mrs. Lee said they were completely silent, and the silence told her all she needed to know. It was so silent that you could hear the tick of the kitchen clock and the melt of the ice in the glass. You know when the ice sort of melts and does a little clink on the side of the glass because two ice cubes separated and clink the side of the glass? Sweet revenge. I made them eat that old-ass food they were trying to give me. Ooh. Mrs. Lee goes on to say that they couldn't say anything because it was the food that they gave me. So if they admitted that something was wrong with this food, then it would be admitting that they purposely gave me the rotten food. So Mrs. Lee said, I didn't need an apology. I just needed them to get a taste of their own medicine, and they did. Ooh, it's spicy. This revenge, it still kind of scares me just because people can die from like eating spoiled food. So like, what if my mom-in-law eats it and then like has to be like severely hospitalized and like dies? That I'd feel like a murder. So I could not do this kind of revenge, but they definitely deserve some kind of revenge like that because that is crazy. What is the thought process behind sister-in-law and mom-in-law just saying, you know what, let's tease her and give her old food? Like, why? What's the point of even doing that? Why are these in-laws like this? I have no idea, but that revenge was deliciously petty, unlike that food, which you don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. So for this last story we're going to go over, the daughter-in-law herself did not have to inflict the revenge because the revenge was dealt with karma. This story was submitted by Mrs. Kim. Mrs. Kim says, my husband and I met at the same company and got married. Since we both have 2 stable jobs and our home is in a good neighborhood and we had the birth of our daughter, I really thought we had the picture perfect happy marriage. There was just one constant thorn though. My mother-in-law always hinted that I should have a son because we only had a daughter. And my husband sort of has a bit of a mama boy streak going. A lot of the times he tries to follow her wishes, etc., and can't really deny her and has a hard time denying her request. But over time, it even seemed like she gave up on the idea that we would have a son. It's not something that you can control, and we didn't really want to have another kid. I'm perfectly happy with my daughter, says Mrs. Kim. For a while, things were calm, but then the happiness frayed a bit. My husband started coming home late more and more. And one night, I discovered that he had secretly taken out some small loans here or there to even pay for things behind my back. One night, I got up for water in the middle of the night and I heard him whispering in another room on a phone. He was talking to a woman. A knot formed in my stomach, so I confronted him and pressed him again and again until he finally confessed. He said, I made a mistake one night after drinking with friends. He had a mistress, and he had only recently learned that the mistress was pregnant. Mrs. Kim could not believe her ears. Her husband was a picture perfect person. There must be some kind of mistake. You know, you're not that kind of person. You know, how could you do that? I want to meet the other woman myself. I could not do that. See, the thing is like everybody always says when their partner does something that I would have never expected it. I think most people really wouldn't expect that kind of behavior from their partner, and I can understand it could be a hard pill to swallow, but I don't think I would want to meet the woman though. No, I wouldn't want to meet her. Like, keep her far away. I don't want to see her. I've never thrown hands at anybody. But I cannot say that if I see somebody who knew that my husband was married and tried to get with her, that I would not feel like throwing hands. So I just avoid those kind of situations because I don't even want to know how I might act. Now, I'm not typically one to lose my cool, but I don't know. I feel like if something like that happens, it might be hard to. I mean, she's pregnant, so I probably wouldn't hit the woman, but I don't think I would want to see her. Like, it would just be dissolved at the husband for me. Like, okay, you say you made a mistake, but now live with it. That's it. Because I can't. Like, for me, trust is so important. If the trust is gone even once, like, you can't get it back. It's hard enough for me to give it. But anyway, so Mrs. Kim said, I met the woman. She was young and very self-centered. And she said some things to me as if she had rehearsed it to herself in the mirror. I know Korean people don't do lip pops, but this is how I envision it. I'm pregnant by him. If you want, I'll show you the date calculations and everything. Apparently, she had already checked our apartment's market price and knew how much money we made and how much we could provide. So she practically declared war with me. She was very confident that she would keep the baby and keep the man. Oh, God. She said at first her mother-in-law was on her side. Her mother-in-law would always say, you don't need to worry about a thing. Where did that ill-mannered girl even come from to latch onto my son like that? Obviously, she's putting on a show just so she could have access to his money. Mrs. Kim said her mom-in-law being so angry and like admonishing her son just made her cry with relief. Mrs. Kim said she didn't really have any intention of divorcing her husband. You know, my husband promised that he'd protect our family and he wouldn't do anything like that again. So she decided to not get a divorce until mom-in-law came back one day soon after and said, please don't take this too hard, but actually the baby that the mistress is carrying is a boy. So again, the previous generation obsessed with having sons. Sons carry on the family legacy, the family heritage. And having a son and continuing the bloodline is more important than the wife's well-being and the granddaughter that she already has, apparently. The grandson is the golden ticket for a happy life, and the daughter-in-law sort of becomes negotiable. Mom-in-law says, it's a boy. What can we do? How about you just step back a little? You know, of course, you're my daughter-in-law forever. And since we can't cut ties, how about you and my son put him on your family register? And how about you raise the boy? How about that? Oh, God. Absolutely. How about no? How about no? Also, in this case, a lot of elders don't want people to know that the husband cheated. Like, it's embarrassing for the family. So a lot of the times they will take like any children out of wedlock and just put them under the family register. So you can take a newborn baby. If you put it under the husband's family register, then it could still technically be like considered her child. It's under their family registry. It's a part of their family, right? But also I don't think I could ever take care of someone else's child like that. Like if my husband cheated and had a kid, like, yeah, it's not the kid's fault. But at the same time, I could not see that kid and every day be reminded that my husband cheated, right? Absolutely not, cannot. I would just leave that situation because I cannot. So Mrs. Kim was livid, and rightfully so. She said, Omoni, how can you say that to me? I don't need a son. Why should I raise a child of the woman my husband cheated with, huh? If I were your daughter, your biological daughter, would you offer me the same advice? Would you be saying the same? Ooh, that's a good one because you know the answer is no. That's the thing. In a lot of these cases, the things the mom-in-laws tell their daughter-in-law, they wouldn't actually want their actual daughters to deal with, right? Hypocrites. So the mom-in-law was like, yeah, I know, but grandson? Son? So Mrs. Kim said, I absolutely will not do that. I will get a divorce. You can bring her in as a daughter-in-law and you can live with her. But Mr. Kim came and was like, do we really have to get a divorce? You know, maybe I can persuade my mom to be okay, you know, with not having a grandson. Your mother is already swayed because a woman is having a boy. And you know you can't go against your mom because you're mama's boy. And I'm not going to sit here and swallow my pride and just stay in a relationship with you like this. Let's just end it. Let's get a divorce. Now, Mrs. Kim says, I even considered an adultery suit against the mistress, the 상경녀 소송. Remember I told you in Korea, if somebody cheats with your partner and you have solid evidence of it, you can sue them and get upwards of $30,000. But she didn't. Why didn't you do it? But anyway, she says, my in-laws wanted to avoid a big scandal and I didn't want to cause problems, so I did not sue her. Don't let these people get off Mrs. Kim. Sue the woman! But the in-laws offered her a huge divorce settlement, so she said she agreed. She divorced him and then she switched companies because remember they work in the same company. So they switched companies and she said she began a new life with her daughter and she was quite happy. Later, the mistress gave birth and my ex-husband married her. It was all orchestrated and set up by my mother-in-law, of course. But after a few years had gone by, Mrs. Kim said, you know, she felt good. The wound had become a scar that she could touch without flinching. So she was well on her way to being healed and over him. But then, since they worked at the same company, you know, one of her really close friends who was an ex-coworker called with a story that took the air right out of her lungs, she said. Her ex had abruptly resigned from the company because one day the friend said it seems that the son who was born was not his. Some man came into the office and was causing a scene and was yelling and they were fighting. Apparently that was his baby. So then rumors spread across the whole department and he was forced to sort of leave the company. So apparently they found out in the end that it wasn't even his baby. They probably did DNA testing. That part wasn't in the story, but I'm sure they would have done that too. Either way, that ain't his baby. He done broke up his family. His wife was willing to forgive him for cheating once and getting someone pregnant. She was gonna stay with your ass, but you broke it off, and that's not even your son. Karma. But I do feel bad for the kid though, because his mom seems like a basket case. Like, people in Korea who are like about that lifestyle, baby daddies cheating and stuff, like, they are really crazy, because that's not something that's a part of the culture, and that's not how people were raised. So when people go off on that side of life, they really be really crazy. So I really hope that kid, the little boy, can have some kind of stable semblance of home, because I do feel bad for that kid. But at the same time, I bet her mom-in-law is kicking herself right now, because wow, that is some crazy karma right there. Especially because where's the integrity? Like, we've married this woman, she has a kid with my son cheats, gets another woman pregnant, and let's just leave her because we want a grandson. Like, when you throw away basic integrity, you will inherit chaos. And this is what happened to Mr. Kim. How can a mother-in-law throw away a daughter-in-law and a granddaughter to choose a grandson, only to bring into the family a woman pregnant with someone else's child? Karma at its finest. And these were some stories of recent drama that I found happening around here in Korea. There's a lot. There's so many to go over. If you guys want me to continue going over these like little drama pieces, then I certainly can. If you want more like crazy drama, then let me know. I can bring more crazy drama. But these are more things that people deal with on a daily basis, so I thought you should know. And maybe throughout, learn a little bit of Korean culture along the way as I share some things. But today, we've gone over 3 different stories where the weight of family rules felt heavier than just basic kindness and integrity. In each story, someone asked a daughter-in-law to accept less space for grief, less respect at the table, and less value than continuing a bloodline. And in each story, she chose a line, sometimes by stepping back, sometimes by showing people in their own behavior and getting petty revenge, and sometimes by simply leaving, because not every situation needs a fight, and sometimes karma will step in and get the revenge for you. So if you are someone who's dealing with something similar, here's a takeaway for you. Your feelings are real. You don't have to disappear to be respectful. Start with small boundaries, and if it doesn't hold, you're allowed to make bigger and bigger and bigger ones. Please put boundaries up for these people. The reason why I threw that in there is because under these videos where we talk about in-law stuff, there's always people sharing their stories and things that they're dealing with. So I think in a way, hearing that there's other in-laws that are acting a fool too sort of brings some sort of closure for people or some sort of comfort to people, and also empowers people to sort of try and get out of those situations themselves too, or to set up stronger boundaries, or to sort of fight for their peace of mind. But to all those people, I just want to say, hang in there. You got this. And thanks for being here today. If this episode helped you, or if you just enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who needs the reminder that we need to set up boundaries with people. And remember, do not serve revenge cold, but serve boundaries at room temperature. It's much better than waiting 8 years and going to someone's funeral and throwing it in their face that they're now experiencing grief. You know? So if you like this video and you'd like to see more videos, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is down below. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, like me on Facebook, and I will see ya.